Okay, looks like we are live with our very first live stream of the Daily KNIME. My name is Phil Kowalski and this is the Procurement Zen YouTube channel. And the plan is to go live every single day for the next month at 8 p.m. CAT to share some digital transformation knowledge with you guys. If you're interested, make sure to click like and subscribe down below. Post your questions. And the Daily KNIME refers, of course, to a software that is called the KNIME Analytics Platform. And this software is what we will cover in this very first episode. And it is what makes digitalization, digital transformation for supply chain management really hands-on for everybody. So I would say let's start, and let me just switch to the screen so I can show you the tool. By the way, you will find all the necessary links, the download link for KNIME, the example files that I'm going to share with you today in the description down below. And let me just quickly show you what we're talking about. So what we're talking about is basically this tool that you can see on the screen right now. And the tool itself is called KNIME Analytics Platform. It's a data analytics platform which actually enables you to do all kinds of interesting stuff. And don't worry if this all seems quite confusing for you. In this very episode, we will cover what KNIME is. We will have a short first automation, which you can also follow through if you want afterwards, if you're watching the recording of that stream. And we will have a little bit an outlook what will happen on this channel over the next few weeks and months. So, are we ready? Okay, let's start. Maybe one thing before. We cannot start. So as I said before, you will find one disclaimer maybe. That is my very first live stream, and these are my first live streams, so they might be a little bit rough around the edges. So that means sometimes you have some fails in here, but I hope that's okay. So I just wanted to make sure that we all are on the same page here. All right, now let's start with the tool.
Nice.
Okay, the tool that you see here is the KNIME Analytics Platform. And if you want to know more about it, you just have to go to knime.com. You'll find the link in the description down below. And let me just quickly guide you through the interface of that tool. So what you see here might be overwhelming, but KNIME has one big advantage, and that is that its learning curve is extremely flat. It's a very visual tool, and the very first few things that we are going to do here, and we will show an example showcase in a few minutes, is that we will automate some Excel tasks. Redundant tasks that we're doing over and over again, just to give you a short glimpse of what the tool can do. But first, let me just show you through the tool. What you see here on the screen is the KNIME Analytics Platform, and in the top left corner here, you see the KNIME Explorer. That is basically where we store our automations, and in KNIME, automation is called a workflow. And you can see we can set up folders and subfolders. Here you see these little triangle icons. These are workflows. And the next thing that we have below that is actually the so-called node repository. The node repository is where all the basic functionality of KNIME lives. It works with nodes. So if you are used to work, for example, with a tool called Alteryx, it's basically the same concept here. We have nodes that we connect with each other, and we will do that in a few minutes so you can see it live and in action. And you see a categorization here of all these nodes. Below that, in my specific setup, we have the outline. You see here, the outline is basically a top-down overview over the whole workflow, which makes it easier to navigate it. The main part of the window is actually what I call the canvas, or it is also called the workbench. This is where we create our workflow. Now, I have talked a few times now about workflows, so let me just quickly show you what a workflow is. Basically, what you see here, these little icons with these arrow connections in between, these are workflows. These are the things we're going to build to automate our work. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. You can automate Excel, which is usually the lowest hanging fruit if you want. You can analyze web pages, you can do text mining, you can make predictions, and we will come to all these use cases one after the other throughout the daily KNIME series. But what you actually see here is a workflow. Let's just finish off the user interface tour and then we'll go into some more detailed topics. At the bottom left, you see a console. Let me just clean that up. Basically, it's where all the feedback from KNIME lives. We also, the big advantage of KNIME here is that the feedback that the tool gives you in case there are any problems is very speaking, so it's not cryptic like sometimes in Windows you get like error messages like there was an error in address 0x5BC350. No, what you can see here is usually a feedback that you can really work with and know if there is a failure, if there's something not working. This console here shows you where you have to look at. Besides that, in an additional tab is the error log. Let's just quickly clean this up. And it's also more technical. I rarely use that very much. I usually focus a lot on the console. Then we have a node monitor. We will come to that once we have our workflow. And finally, we have something that's called a description. And description is something like an inbuilt help. Let me just quickly show you, and we come to what a node is, but let me just quickly click on this node here, and you see that there is a description, what this thing here does. So it's like an inbuilt help. You see that it's different maybe for this node, and so let me just switch back here. So we have been talking now, no, let me just switch back to the workflow. So that's what I said when I meant it's rough around the edges. So let me just quickly explain what a node is. A node is a microstep, a micro function that you can do in KNIME, basically. So what you do here, if we just look at the workflow, we're going to build this workflow together in a few minutes, but what it basically does here is it reads Excel files, right? Then you see below that node, you see that it's orange. And orange usually means that's an input node. That's usually one of the nodes where such a workflow, such an automation starts. Then we have yellow nodes where, for example, some working with data happens. And we have red nodes here. These are usually the final nodes. Those write files, create results, and so on. Below the node, if we just go a little bit deeper into that, you see this traffic light system. And let me just quickly reset that by clicking here. Now you see these nodes here are, instead of being green, they are yellow. And usually a node has 3 states. So the very first state that we don't see here is red. That means this node, for example, the Excel reader that should import an Excel file into KNIME, basically says, well, I'm not configured. I don't know what I should do. Then we have yellow, like we see right now on the screen. And that means, well, I am configured and I could start to execute now. While green means I have executed, here are the results. And usually the flow of these nodes goes from left to right. So you see it starts here and goes through these nodes. And as I said before, we will build this workflow in a second together live here basically. Also, you see here at the right-hand corner, you see a black triangle. That's basically an output port. So, for example, this column rename node, it gets data from here, does something with the data it gets, and delivers the result to this output port. And from there on, we can then use this data in additional functions. One huge advantage of KNIME actually is that KNIME enables you to do microsteps. That sounds like a big disadvantage in the beginning, but quite honestly, it's one of its biggest advantages because it includes a fail fast concept basically. You can play around, trial and error, just see some things. Does it work? Does it immediately deliver the results I want to have or not? And that's quite interesting because if you compare this, for example, to Excel, something I would assume every procurement person is very, very good in, forget a semicolon, forget a comma, set a bracket the wrong way. It can be quite cumbersome to find where the error is. And here, after such a microsteps, basically only here, reading a file, you immediately see, did it work out? Was everything correct? Did it read the file correctly? Did it do what I expected it to do? So that is how you do it. And then you see these lines here. Basically, these are, if you want, the streets on which the data gets transported from one node to another. There are other things and more complicated things like meta nodes and components that we will not cover in this session of the Daily KNIME, but we'll come to this very soon. Where you can bundle nodes together to get some specific functionality and so on. Also, so I will link to it in one of the future episodes so you can download them themselves. So now that we have talked so much theory, one last recommendation, and let me just switch back to KNIME. One last recommendation here. I will provide you exactly that workflow over at my website at procurementzen.com/thedailyKNIME. Let me just quickly show it to you. That's here. You can find exactly the workflow we're looking at here. You can download it from my website for free, of course. There's no need to sign up. Of course, if you want to sign up for something, if you want to listen to the latest podcast episodes, I'm a podcaster, I'm a blogger when it comes to procurement and negotiation. Feel free to do so, but to download it, it's freely available, my example here. So I would say then, shouldn't we start with creating some automation? All right. So we will start here really from start to finish. So the very first thing we need to do here, and let me just quickly turn off the camera, is to create a new workflow. And we just go here in the top left corner, you see this one here. I click on the little downward arrow and say new KNIME workflow. So KNIME asks me, how do I want to call it? KNIME, or let's call it the Daily KNIME Live Workflow. All right, that's what we will do. Okay, now you see an empty canvas. So don't worry, I will show you later if your canvas looks slightly different. You can see I have these grid lines in here, but that's really not necessary. It's just something that makes it more convenient for me. But we will cover all these things in future episodes. There is so much stuff to cover, but I wanted to create something together with you right from the start. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to read in our Excel file. Oh, before I read in the Excel file, let me just quickly show you what our base data is. Just a moment. That should be this one here. You see, it's something that looks very, that looks like a standard reporting. Of course, this is all example data, but you see a report which has 10,000 lines, so 10,000 line items if you want. We have a purchase order number. We have a cost center here who is the demand owner. We have a demand description. Of course, this is all gibberish because that's just example data. We have example suppliers here. We have a purchase order value here and a purchase order delivery date. So this is what we are going to take into KNIME, because now we can do all kinds of stuff with this, right? We could build a pivot table out of this. But the interesting thing we want to do is we want to automate this kind of stuff. So instead of doing these kind of reports over and over and over again, we want to automate it. All right, so let's just close this one out, and let me just quickly show you what we are going to create. You see this one here, and we have the base data here, and we will have a additional table sheet volume by cost center, so we can see who issued which costs, which demands, and we will do another sheet as well. All right, so the very first thing we want to do here in KNIME is we want to import our Excel file. And you can import a lot of files into KNIME, and there are usually always a lot of different ways in which you can do that. But what I wanted to do here first is show you how to do it with a note. So I go into the note repository, and you see that here I have this search bar. So I know that the note to import an Excel file is called an Excel reader. So let's just quickly type in Excel, and you see it filters automatically down, and it also makes sense, right? It's in the input-output category. In a subcategory read, there is a called Excel reader. I click on that, and immediately on the right-hand corner, I can see the description of the node and what it does. I could scroll through it. It has a standard format, but I don't want to bother you with reading all this stuff. Let's just use it. All right, so while we have it selected in here, I just double click it, and double clicking immediately adds it to my canvas. And now you see the red status that we couldn't see before. Right now, I didn't tell this Excel reader functionality, this node here, what it should do. Well, it doesn't know. Which file should I read? What should I do with it? It doesn't know, because it means I don't know what to do. And you see in the console, please specify a file. That's what I meant with, okay, you can help KNIME here, or KNIME helps you to understand where it has problems. Here, this red mark, this red traffic light, and this console message here are strongly related. So, shall we open this node? Yes, we should. So just double click on it, and it opens such a configuration window. That's usually always the way how you work in KNIME. And what we want to do here is we want to import basically one of the files that we have on our screen. We could now go through our local file system here, but I have it differently. So if you want to follow through with the example files that I share with you over at the Procurement Zen, you just read from local file system, which is basically the Windows File Explorer. I switch this to relative to and the current workflow. And now if I click browse, it basically shows me this folder here. I know it does not. See, as I said, let's just, no, that doesn't work. All right. Let me just quickly see where the problem is. No, that doesn't work as well. So it should be current workflow. I don't know why it's not working. Oh, I know. I have to close this once again. You see, that's what I meant by being a little bit rough around the edges. Of course, this then needs to sit here. If I want to have access to this file folder here, I need to have it in the same folder where the data files are. So open it once again. Now it should work. All right. Let's just quickly add the Excel reader here once again. Open it by double clicking on it. Now we set it to relative to, and we say current workflow. And if we now just open this, have this open dialog, you see this folder here, data. And in that, we have the example dataset.xlsx, and that is basically our baseline file. And now when I click open, just watch this area here. It preloads the stuff and it tells us already some quite interesting information. So let's just click open, and you see I have a German Excel. I'm from Germany, so everything is in German here. But I think you're very well aware of this kind of dialogues here. All right, let's just load it. And you see what it did. Obviously, this node immediately recognized from the original file which are the file headers. We can also say if we have different sheets in a file, we can choose a different sheet here to import, because sometimes Excel files do not always have the relevant data for our workflow directly on the first sheet. And you could select the sheet here, which is our how can I say, our sheet that's just labeled example dataset. Okay, I also have a tick mark here that says table contains column names in row number 1. So if I untick that, you see that all of a sudden the first row gets into this what is called a data table. But that was the original setting was correct. So now we have this here. All right. So now that we have done this, you can also see some very interesting things. You see a preview, and that is very helpful when it comes to, well, is KNIME doing what I'm expecting it to do? And as you can see, it is, obviously. And you can also see these little letters in front of the column headers. And that is also very helpful information, because KNIME automatically tries to detect what kind of data is in each of these columns. For example, if it's an S, like here in cost center, it says, well, it may be a string, which is another term for a text, right? So we see, is this text? Yes, this is all text, so that is obviously right. You see here on the left-hand side an I. I stands for integer, which is a number. Well, we will change that in a moment, because we don't need to do any calculations with the purchase order number. We do not add up purchase order numbers or so. We would rather do calculations with PO values. So the mathematics, if you want to, so right? Yeah, basically, sometimes I just try to include these funny memes here. All right, so let's just let KNIME run. One very important thing when it comes to working with nodes is, you see it auto labels this node here as node 1. If I can make one recommendation, and one recommendation only, is label your nodes. Label your nodes, guys, because if you use a workflow that you use once a month and it reads node 257 after a month, you don't know what this node does. Yes, it obviously reads some Excel file, but what specific settings and so on. So always, always, always label your nodes. For example, if you want to share your KNIME workflows with me or with others, that definitely helps also others to understand what you're doing. So let's just label it and say, okay, import base table or base file maybe. Okay, so now it has this yellow status, right? Let's just quickly, oops. And you see now we have the navigator here. We can just move around this blue box. It is yellow. All right, so now let's execute this. How do we do it? We let KNIME now import. There are several options. As always, you could use this little execute selected nodes. It also gives you an indication about a keyboard shortcut. You could press F7, or you could right click on it and choose execute. All right. All right, so here we are. KNIME has now imported, let me just see, 70,000 data points in a few seconds, 10,000 rows with 7 columns. So one thing we could do here now in the node monitor, as I said before, we can see what it did. It imported them. Another way to see the results is go to right click on that node and go to the very last point in that menu here. And when you see I hover over that, it reads, what did it read? Opens a view on output number 1. Let's just do this. And now we can see exactly as in the preview. We see an integer column here, text, 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 integer values once again. And another interesting info, because KNIME can also work with data, date and time data. So it immediately recognized that this obviously is a date column, right? So now it's green, it has executed. Let's move on to the next step. The next step is, you could do this or don't, but it's just an example here. The very next step is, as you can see from here, this PO number is considered an integer, meaning we could do calculations with it, but what sense does it make to add up two purchase order numbers, right? It does not make sense. So we turn this also into a string. That's a little bit strange in KNIME, but nevertheless, we do this with a node that's called column rename, because with the column rename node, we can not only rename the columns, the headers, but we could also change its data type. So let's just quickly do that. And you see, by entering column rename in here, it filters down to the nodes that have these this title. And now I'll show you a different way to connect your nodes. Maybe let's just drag and drop it in here. And now we need to make a connection, because right now data goes in here, goes out here, but nothing goes in here. So let's just quickly connect it. And it's as easy as dragging and dropping a line from one output port to the next input port. However, the configuration right now, there is nothing configured. And you can see here that it says exactly that, no configuration available. So as we have heard before, double click and open it. So which is the column we want to work with? Well, let's just work with the PO number. We want to change maybe its title to purchase order number, because maybe we want more readable titles. And we change its value to a string value. All right, that's it already. Click OK. As I said, Microsteps. I'm sorry. So let's label it. What does it do? Rename call to and data type from int to string. All right. Let's just execute that. Let's now do it differently. Let's click on the execute all executable nodes, or Shift F7. Bam. Now let's open it up again. You see now that it reads purchase order number, and all of a sudden now it's a string, a text information, right? All right. So what's the very next thing we would do? If we just have a look at the information we have here, well, one thing that is typical for procurement reporting would be, well, let's make a summary of costs by cost centers, right? All right, let's do this. And in KNIME, we're going to do this by using a so-called group by node. The group by node is basically the same as a pivot table in Excel, and you will discover in a few seconds that it has the same logic. All right, then let's just enter group, and you see here is a group by. Now let me show you another way how you can connect nodes to your workflow. You see that the very last node here is selected because it has this black border around it. We just double click on the group by, and it automatically connects it to the output port of the chosen node, or of the selected node. So once again, here it gives us some feedback. It says, well, we have not defined any aggregation column. Our aggregation would be possibly about purchase order value, and we should also select one group or aggregation column. So let's quickly do that. All right, so by what do we want to group? As we said before, we want to group by cost center. So there are several ways. You see this logic here with these exclude and include lists nearly everywhere in KNIME, and it's very helpful to understand it. So everything that's in here in the red is on the red hand side is excluded. Everything that's in here is on the green hand side. And we could also, for example, if we had now a very long list of columns, we could filter it down. But basically our list of columns is very overseeable. Just double click on this one, and it brings it to the right hand side. Let's just remove it by clicking the left arrow. and it would work the same if I select and click the right arrow, right? Okay, one important thing here, I usually want to keep my original column names also in the resulting table. So that's why I choose keep original names in here. Now let's head over to the next tab, and you see we have 3 different types of aggregation. I nearly always use the manual aggregation because I can make some adjustments here. All right, so what do I want to aggregate? Well, I want to aggregate, like in a pivot table, the PO value. So the aggregation is basically the data that you have in the bottom right box of an Excel to pivot table. All right, so PO value, click add. But we do not want to have the mean aggregation method. Instead, we want to have sum. And it's similar to pivot tables. Once again, we just choose sum here. Bam, we're done. Right? We keep original names. Now we still label it. Say group by group PO value by cost center. And we could, for example, Control B, also bold the column names. All right. Now that we're in here, let's just quickly execute by using F7. All right. And you see, if we look at the results, here we have our cost centers. Here we have the PO values. If you're surprised by the values that they are so closely together, which is usually not the case in procurement, you usually have something more like Pareto, how do you say that, separation. That's just because the example data generator just tries to make it as even as possible. So don't be surprised here. We see now all the cost centers that we have with the aggregated PO values they have created. All right. But looking at our base data, there is some other interesting information that might be valuable to us. For example, we see a supplier with PO values here. Shouldn't we also group by suppliers? Yes, we should. And we could easily do that. We still have this one collected. As before, we double click on the group by node, and you can see now that we have an additional stream, if you want, or an additional line here. All right. So, and if you wonder how I do these movements, I basically it's on my keyboard, holding down Shift and String, and the up arrow. Up moves it up, down moves it down. So let's maybe just take this one here. Oops, no. And move them more here into the middle, so it's more visible. All right, as said before, F2 for labeling, and now group PO value by supplier. Once again, Control B for bold, Control B for bold again. Okay, and now just have the same dialog as before, but this time we want to use the supplier. So we double click on the supplier, it goes over to in the include box. We just say keep original names, and the manual aggregation once again is sum. So let's just scroll, it's sorted alphabetically here, sum, all right. So execute, and now we have our list of suppliers with their corresponding purchasing volume, right? This is a little bit more, but you see it's still very evenly spread, and that's because of the quality of the example data. So one interesting thing that we eventually want to do here is we want to know which share each supplier here has based on the overall volume, right? It would be interesting to see how much, for example, in this example here, China Resources has compared to the overall purchasing volume. And we're going to do this with a mathematical node, or better, with a math formula. All right, so let's do that. Let's just search for math. You see not March formula, but math formula here. Double click and edit here. it's auto-connected. We just calculate supplier share percentage maybe. All right. And here we see, when we now double click the math formula configuration, we will see that we have a different view that we also will experience quite often. Let's do that. All right, you see we have an expression here. We have a list of available columns that we can do calculation with here, and we have all kinds of functions and calculation methods here. The good thing about KNIME is, for example, if you look here, it just gives a short explanation. Interesting also, if you remember that the other columns were strings, of course you cannot do mathematics with strings. So that's why only the PO value is left over here. Do is we want to divide the PO value, so we double click on that, it gets automatically added to this expression engine, and then divide slash by the column sum. So the sum of the whole column, but which column? Of course, once again, PO value. And as this does not automatically create percentages, let's just wrap this in brackets and multiply it with 100. All right, and we call this share percentage. We could also override existing columns, but that's not what we want to do right now. Also, if you don't want to have like endless decimals, make sure this convert to int box is unchecked. All right, let's just quickly do this. Execute once again. Bam. And now here, that's a little bit confusing. You see quite a lot of decimals here, but if you open it up, here you only see three digits after the comma, right? All right, so now I would say we have our supplier PVO reporting here, and we have our cost center PVO reporting here. Let's write this back to Excel, because basically everything that happens in here in these nodes does not change anything in the Excel file we imported here. That does not change the file. Everything here happens within KNIME. All right. So for export, we would need an Excel writer. And we just add it here and say write supplier PVO sheet. And let's just open it. We just say once again relative to current workflow, and we choose an existing file already, so we just add it. We say here this example dataset final. We will append the sheet, and we will call this, how do we want to call this? That is called, what is that? What are we looking at? We are looking at the supplier. Okay, supplier PVO overwrite. We also want to auto size the columns. We want to write the column headers, not just the data, but the headers as well. Okay, so let's just quickly execute that. It writes to Excel. Let's have a quick look at Excel. Open the output set. You see supplier PVO here. All right, so let's close that once again. Otherwise, the Excel KNIME could not write. And let's just add here another Excel writer. So shift string and clicking write. We label it write cost center PVO sheet. All right. Double click. Once again, as before, relative to current workflow data. Example data set final. We will say append. We will say this is called, we will call it overwrite here. We will label the sheet cost center PVO, write column headers, auto size the columns. All right, execute, done. look into Excel. Cost center PVO, here we are. All right. So let's just, without writing, let's just show you how it took some minutes to create this workflow, but let me just reset these notes here and let me just quickly show you how fast this program is if you have once built your workflow and now you can automate it, because you go to the very last node here, to the Excel writer, to the first one, and just let me just click, let me just see, did I say override? Yes, I did. All right. Let me just quickly show you. So basically now it would all start, run from the start. And let me just quickly show you. I press F7. Boom, done. What was it? 3 seconds. And now the second one as well. Boom, done. That was another 3 seconds. I personally think that is a huge advantage for people that have to do redundant tasks. So you have more time for the more interesting stuff. So negotiations, supplier research, and so on. And how KNIME can help you here, we will show in the next videos somewhere. So thank you very much for tuning in to that live stream. I guess this very first live stream, I'm pretty much alone. There's not very much audience out there. Let me just quickly have a look. No, there is not really anyone watching this. So you might be watching the recording. And yeah, basically that's it. Thank you very much. And see you tomorrow for another episode of Daily KNIME. Make sure to click like and subscribe, and see you tomorrow.